Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the final session for the Regional Outlook Forum 2019. Session 5 will discuss Malaysia, a new beginning. This session will be moderated by Dr. Francis Hutchinson, Senior Fellow and Coordinator of Malaysia Studies Program at ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute. Dr. Hutchinson, please.
So, welcome back to the final panel of the day entitled Malaysia, a New Beginning. On May 9th, the previously unbeaten and unbeatable Barisan Nasional coalition was overturned. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad came out of retirement to ally with many of his erstwhile foes and resume the prime ministerial portfolio after a 15-year absence. The Islamist political party PAS defied expectations to show that it is a permanent, albeit geographically circumscribed, fixture in the country's political landscape. And in an unprecedented move, earlier this week, Sultan Mohammed, the Sultan of Kelantan, abdicated as king or agong. Clearly, the country is undergoing tectonic changes, and the topics and the speakers that we have for you today are interesting, insightful, and impactful. So to quote Sultan Mohammed himself, sila duduk dan jangan lari. Our first speaker, on my left, Khairi Jamaluddin, is a member of parliament for Rembau, shadow finance minister, and former minister of youth and sport, as well as leader of UMNO's youth wing. He has worked as a journalist, a policy aide, and investment banker, as well as a high-level polo player. The title of his presentation is May 9th, a wake-up call for UMNO. On my right, our second speaker, Dr. Wan Chin Wat, is head of the Institutional Reform and Governance Program at the Penang Institute, one of Malaysia's foremost think tanks. He has degrees in economics, psychology, and a PhD in comparative politics from the University of Essex. Dr. Wang specializes in electoral systems, party and identity politics, and federalism. He has just edited a special issue for the journal The Round Table on regime change in Malaysia, and he's also one of the founders of the electoral reform group Bersih 2.0. And the title of his presentation is How Viable is Pakatan Harapan, a permanent coalition without a dominant party. So each of the speakers will speak for 20 minutes, after which we will proceed to Q&A. If I can now invite YB Khairi to take the floor. Here or?
Okay, you don't mind. Politicians need to have the rostrum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Francis, for that introduction. And thank you to ISIS for inviting me to share some of my insights into May 9th and the outlook for Malaysia's future. I'd like to start by obviously stating the obvious. We are in extremely uncharted territory for Malaysia today. And this obviously started on May 9th with a historic change in government. The Barisan Nasional ruling coalition that was in charge since Merdeka 1957, in fact, even before that precursor, Federal Legislative Assembly elections 1955, finally saw an end to our time in government. I think the first thing to observe about what happened on the 9th of May, and I speak from first-hand experience, both as a candidate as well as somebody observing the events that unfolded over the next 24 hours, 48 hours closely, was that it was a coming of age not just of political consciousness in Malaysia, but also it was a coming of age of early form of political maturity. There was a peaceful transition, no riots, no emergency rule, no coup. Malaysia was long a one-party state, but it demonstrated that political transition can be smooth. even with so much at stake. I mean, one would imagine that with the backdrop of scandal and real possibility of prosecution, there were parties which would want to win at all cost and stay in power at all cost. But yet, the results were, we accepted the results and conceded the elections and paved the way for a smooth transition. And this was all the more remarkable because the results of the general election, the 14th general elections, for many, including the then opposition, the Pakatan Harapan coalition, was a complete surprise. I mean, it would be different if it was expected that Pakatan Harapan would win outright majority in parliament. But it came with a complete surprise for everybody. And notwithstanding this surprising seismic event, the transition was relatively smooth and orderly. Now, I'd like to keep the talk today as forward-looking as possible, so I'll keep my observations about why BN lost to a minimum, unless, of course, there are questions later. But I do want to touch a little bit about why I think things went the way they did on the 9th of May, because this instructs certain lessons for what's about to happen. Having looked at the trends, and there are many reasons, different states, different reasons, different districts, different reasons, but the main reason was a straightforward rejection of Barisan Nasional, specifically of our leader, Datuk Seri Muhammad Najib, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia. And this was largely due, as many of you who follow Malaysia know, this was largely due to a coalescence of scandal and economic frustrations and concerns. They all combined into a very, very seamless narrative. Pakatan Harapan, the current ruling coalition, the then opposition, successfully linked the issues of cost of living, the abolishment, or the introduction rather, of the goods and services tax to scandal, the 1MDB scandal. People were worse off because we had introduced the goods and services tax to pay for 1MDB debt. And that became a very, very powerful narrative to sell on the ground, where people felt it was very, very difficult to make ends meet. And people were not only finding it difficult to make ends meet, they were enraged that their predicament was caused by a government that had possibly perpetrated the largest financial heist in history. So what you had as a voter on the 9th of May was a rational, economic, and emotional scandal rejection. So it was not just rational choice. It combined together with a deep, innate rejection by the people. So you had the complete perfect storm. Rationalizing our track record was not good enough because it obviously didn't reflect on the ground. Speaking to them about track record and nostalgia and what we had done before obviously didn't work out because emotionally they were angry. And on Pakatan Harapan's side this time around, they had the familiarity of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Now, there was a lot of historical revisionism before the elections at recreating this Mahathirist nostalgia of fast-paced growth in 1990s when he was Prime Minister for the first time. There was a lot of erasing of the past, forgetting the crony capitalism and the destruction of institutions associated with the first act of Mahathir, how he emaciated the judiciary, how he stripped the rulers of their immunity. There was a lot of rewriting of history in order for Mahathir to be acceptable to a new generation, in order for a new generation to think of those atavistic days of Mahathir in positive terms, glowing terms. We were growing fast, we were doing well economically. We want Mahathir to be Prime Minister again. And don't forget that many of these young voters were too small or weren't even alive when Mahathir was Prime Minister for the first time. But they succeeded in doing that. And of course, the icing on the cake was if Anwar Ibrahim, who was sacked under Mahathir, who was jailed and beaten the first time under Mahathir, and the Democratic Action Party, DAP, which was routinely vilified under Mahathir, could work with him, could forgive him, could accept him as the incoming Prime Minister, then surely he must be a new Mahathir. And that was, again, a powerful sell to a lot of Malaysians to say that, obviously, this is a new reincarnation. And most people would argue that without Mahathir, the results of the general election would be very, very different. He enabled and he was able to swing that Malay vote, 20% or whatever it is that many people are still calculating and trying to figure out, to ensure that the Malay heartland did not give their votes and support to UMNO and Barisan Nasional, which took Pakatan Harapan over the top. Many young voters were also attracted by hope. Now, Pakatan Harapan in Malay means the coalition of hope. And this was reflected in their manifesto: to stabilize petrol prices, to abolish toll payments on motorways, delaying payments or repayments of student loans, and abolishing the goods and services tax. Now, these slew of populist promises spoke to the economic concerns of Malaysians, especially young people who are finding it difficult to find jobs, earning less than the cost of living in the urban centers. So, in some ways, these promises also took them over the top amongst young people and also the average Malaysian. But because of all of this, 9th of May brought with it tremendously high expectation. There was euphoria. There was euphoria when the results were announced, and it was called Malaysia Baru, Malaysia Reborn. Malaysia Baru means a new Malaysia, a new era for Malaysia. But where are we exactly 9 months after the birth of Malaysia Baru, or New Malaysia? Now, there are some polls that people have published over the last couple of weeks, but after what happened to us in the last elections, I don't look at polls anymore. However, over the last few months, public opinion has not been as kind and forgiving. The abolishment of the GST has seen official CPI numbers come down. It's less than 2%. But if you talk to the man on the street, and this is anecdotal, but seems to be very, very prevalent, nobody or not many people will say that the cost of living has reduced over the last 8 months in Malaysia. And of course, you have famously over the last couple of days, Prime Minister Najib even going to the wet market and asking about prices of eggs, just to demonstrate in comments on social media that people are still feeling the pinch. And if you look at the rest of the economic situation, it certainly hasn't improved over the last 8 months. Ringgit continues to be weak, portfolio investments fleeing as opposed to coming in, commodity prices are low, affecting tens of thousands of smallholders in the heartland. The budget was underwhelming, and there is no clarity as far as economic strategy is concerned beyond, at least we're not Barisan Nasional. Now that worked for the first 3 months, but people are starting to say, you can't possibly go on governing by saying, at least we're better than Barisan Nasional. Investors, business, they demand more than that. They demand a strategy, vision, and especially a program of implementation in how to address some of these problems. All of this, Francis, I noticed the clock has reset to 20 minutes. Does that mean I get 20 minutes? He's not listening to me, obviously, so I do get 20 minutes. Okay. Went back to 20 minutes, is pointing it out. So okay. Now, all of this grim reality of suddenly governing, because you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, and the prose right now is becoming very, very dreary and boring. And with all of this is accompanied by a lot of policy U-turns and reversals. Now, Barisan Nasional projects, including the project that was supposed to build a high-speed rail link between Singapore and Malaysia, and a railway between the east coast and west coast of Malaysia, initially cancelled with much aplomb, but now it's not cancelled, it's delayed, looking at it again, want to revive it again, now back on the drawing board. Promises that public funds will not be used for certain things. Of course, I have to mention this because it's topical. Dr. Mahathir, Prime Minister, is very obsessed with having a national car. He wants to have a third national car. The arbiter of a high technology nation is a car, nothing else. They promised that the national car won't use any funds, and the finance minister promised this publicly, but a couple of days ago that's been broken, and some millions of ringgit have been approved to develop a prototype of the national car. And even if you come up with the excuse that we don't have money because BN spent all of it, that's why we can't fulfill our promises. Look, there are some promises which don't even require any money. It doesn't cost anything. Pakatan Harapan came in saying we're going to make sure that there are strong, high, thick Chinese walls between politics and business. No more political appointments from the governing party into the boards of government-linked companies, and this has been broken multiple times over the last couple of days. These are just a few examples of not what I'm saying as a member of the opposition, but what people are saying online. Now, in addition to this, I have 3 minutes left. I just want to rush through my last couple of points, is the rise of identity politics. It's a feature of New Malaysia, especially a noticeable Malay discontent. The Malay heartland is feeling threatened. Rational, manufactured or otherwise, this is real. And this culminated in a mass rally on the 8th of December, opposing the government's plans to ratify the International Convention on eliminating all forms of racial discrimination, which Mahathir saw that the Malay discontent was real. There was a climb down and there was a reversal in ratifying ICET. I'm going to make 4 points before I stop in the 2 minutes that remain. One, political uncertainty is real in Malaysia, and this in turn affects economic sentiment. We have, whether you like it or not, a 93-year-old prime minister. Even Singapore prepares meticulously for succession because it realizes correctly that this is important to demonstrate continuity. The political chatter that one hears in KL is not when, but if Anwar Ibrahim will succeed Mahathir at all. This needs to be addressed at some point with a clear transition plan in place. Let's not forget what happened the last time there was supposed to be a transition between these two gentlemen. It didn't end, well, it ended in tears. Secondly, competing centers of power. Mahathir's second act is very different from his first, where he was eventually able to consolidate executive power. Now he has to contend with other power centers. He has his coalition partners. He's the smallest party in Pakatan Harapan. He has business interests, civil society, which helped Pakatan Harapan win the elections, Sarawak and Sabah, which are increasingly independent. He has parliament, which has shown to be more independent. He has the judiciary, which is more emboldened. And of course, he has the royal families, which is a very topical issue right now. This means that Malaysia will be a more complex country to deal with. Singapore can't just deal with BN, PAP and BN. There are many, many actors, different centers of power. But there's a good thing to this. The fact that there are many centers of power allows for reforms to strengthen these institutions. Now, I want to speak about Parliament briefly. Parliament is a good case in point. We started with the announcement of select committees, and I'm on the select committee for the budget as Shadow Finance Minister. And we hope this is something that can lead to sustainable reforms where there's no concentration of power in the executive, and that this competing centers of power are institutionalized for a maturing democracy. And let me end by saying the last thing that I want to address is reform as well, and that's the reform of UMNO. And that's probably my toughest challenge. I think what I want is to take UMNO away from PAS's embrace, the Islamic Party's embrace, and occupy the real position where UMNO deserves to be, which is at the center of Malay politics. Reclaim the center, be that inclusive, progressive Malay party that doesn't discriminate, that's not racist, but that articulates the voice and the concerns of the Malay community. I believe that there's been a leadership transition in UMNO, and I hope that the reforms will continue. If you ask me later, do I have plans to leave UMNO? Do I have plans to jump party? I can address that now. I am committed to becoming a credible opposition because that's what Malaysia deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, YB. You did an admirable job of keeping to time, even though this clock showed 4 different times. You still managed to keep to time. So with this, if I can now invite Dr. Wong to take the floor.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thanks, Francis. Thanks to Mr. Choi and ISIS Yusuf Ishaq Institute for having me here. How viable is PH? A permanent coalition without a dominant party. I want to offer my critique on 2 points on the permanent coalition model, and further to take it on and ask if the absence of a hegemonic party like UMNO, is that a positive or negative factor to the model? Granted, for multi-ethnic and multi-religious Malaysia, given the first past the post electoral system, a permanent coalition in government is the only model that we have known to work of power sharing. for the record, it did not start that way. UMNO founding president, Dr. On Jaafar, actually tried to form a multi-ethnic party, the Independence of Malaya Party. But that party was defeated flatly by an ad hoc and local coalitions of UMNO and its later Chinese ally, MCA, in the 1952 Kuala Lumpur municipal election. And that set the story. The three parties alliance, later joined by the Indian party, MIC, went on to win the 1955 national election and independence from Britain for Malaya in 1957. And that led people to believe that this is the only way that's worked. When the model faced its major challenge in 1969, whereby an electoral setback for alliance resulted in a Sino-Malay riot. The fate was not shattered. Instead, people believed that the model needed to be expanded. So in 1974, we have the alliance replaced by a 9-member Barisan Nasional. At its height, before 2008, Barisan Nasional had up to 14 component parties. And the idea was so entrenched that the opposition believed, at least since 1990, the only way that you can out Barisan Nasional is to build a second multi-ethnic coalition, a reformed replica of Barisan Nasional to replace Barisan Nasional. That's the narrative of two coalition system. And so, in 1990, you have Gagasan Rakyat and Angkatan Perpaduan Ummah, led by Tengku Razali, former finance minister. In 1999, you have Barisan Alternative, led by former Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. And 2013, again by Anwar Ibrahim, but a different brand, Pakatan Rakyat. And 2018, Pakatan Harapan by former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad. So it's very easy for us to believe and say, with the success of the fourth attempt to out Barisan Nasional, that the narrative of two coalition system has worked. No, it has not. It has failed for the fourth time while achieving the goal of ousting Barisan Nasional. The second multi-ethnic coalition collapsed once the prospect of winning power disappeared. Razali coalition was effectively disbanded before the next election in 1995. Anwar's first coalition, Barisan Alternative, ended in 2001. Anwar's second coalition, Pakatan Rakyat, ended in 2015. And Barisan Nasional effectively ended within 2 months after the loss in May. And when the dust settled on 10th of May, Barisan Nasional had 79 seats. Today, you're basically left with UMNO with 34 seats. It has lost 17, UMNO has lost 17 MPs alone. The entire Sarawak has pulled out. So what's wrong with that problem? Now, let's go back to the permanent coalition. This is where the failure of having a two coalition system actually underlie the problem with the permanent coalition in government. The first problem is radicalizations of opposition. Malaysians like to believe that if you have a centrist government, then you can usher in moderate and accommodative politics. But that's not the case, because a centrist government cannot work if you have a powerful opposition that would pull it away. That was the situation that the alliance has encountered up to 1969, and then in the later years by Barisan Nasional up to 1990. When the centrist position is captured and monopolized by the government, the opposition will actually push to take frank position simply as means of product differentiation. Because there's no room for you to be in the middle. And today, this is a situation that Barisan Nasional is facing. Sorry, Pakatan Harapan is facing. The opposition is not left with a hope for coming together. In fact, instead of a national two-party system, two-coalition system, you have 4 regional two-party system. In Kelantan, Terengganu, it was between PAS and UMNO. The rest of West Malaysia, it was PH and UMNO. In Sabah and Sarawak, it was PH and Italai and XBN. To understand the problem with radicalizations of opposition is actually very simple. You can recall from the movie Spider-Man. Spider-Man's uncle, before passing away, gave him a very important moral advice. With great powers come great responsibility. You can turn that around and understand how politicians behave. Without the prospect of great power, there's no obligation to be responsible. Opposition would maximize the moment when they cannot see the prospect of coming into power. What they care for is to win more legislative seats, and if possible, to win state government. So if your constituency has a very mono-ethnic, mono-communal home turf, there's no reason for you to go to the middle until you weaken the government enough. This is a situation we have. Look at the case on ICET, the International Conventions on Eliminations of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. ICET would not invalidate Article 153 or NEP as long as it is a form of affirmative action. That's not how the opposition want to see it. The opposition take it as an onslaught to Malay power and dominance. And the government eventually would just have to back down. I'm very glad that YB Khairi said that he would commit to middle ground politics, because that's what we need. But it might be not so easy for him to do so if his effort to stay in the on the middle ground will not be rewarded electorally. Because his party may abandon him as a wonderful but useless idealist. It's a reality that we are looking at. So you have a challenge of radicalizations of opposition. That's number one. Number two, the permanent coalition system has a flaw in itself. It does not allow internal competition. Seats, constituency are allocated to component member, coalition members before election, almost on a permanent basis. Two criteria are used in allocating seats. One, the ethnic compositions of constituency electorate. Second, past record of contestation for the party. What it means is that over time, if a party gets stronger, the party may not be able to get more seats, because there's no mechanism for you to take over from your ally. What it means is also moral hazard. For parties that were given constituency, they can remain complacent until they're so weak to be kicked out. And at the party level, what it means is you cannot have bottom-up candidacy selection, as in the case of UK. Seats, when the seats allocated to a party, a component member is limited, while your talents come from everywhere, naturally you need to have top-down candidacy selections. Vast power is therefore vested in top party leadership. And naturally, they will want to field their loyalists against their dissidents. And that spelled the trouble of party infighting. We have seen that in PKR before elections. Now, the trouble of not having a mechanism for open and productive, healthy internal competition is also appearing after election in power sharing. Look at the government lineup after May. PKR won 47 seats, followed by DAP 41, Bersatu 13, Amanah 11. But in terms of allocations of ministerial and deputy minister posts, every 8 out of 10 MPs from Bersatu and Amanah get a job. But only every 3 out of 10 from DAP and PKR does so. Now, from the surface, you would probably think this is injustice towards the larger party, PKR and DAP, and favoritism from Mahathir for his own party and Amanah. But if you look beyond that, it's a fundamental question of how to measure and reward coalition members' contribution to the victory. Take Bersatu, for example. Bersatu contested the toughest seats in UMNO hardcore, so they didn't do well. And they probably deliver only 5 to 10% of votes in many marginal seats won by PKR and DAP. But without that critical 5 to 10%, Barisan Pakatan Harapan may be the largest opposition ever, but not the new government. How do you measure this? There's no way for you to set an objective measure. So Mahathir used his power to decide what he wants. What happened with his successor, whether Anwar or someone else? Would they retain this? If they would not, if he would not, then the question is that the parties are put in a situation to make sure how their best interests can be secure. So that built in tension between the allies. So you can look at the Mahathir-Anwar conflict as a personal, interpersonal issue. You can also look at it structurally. The system does not help the party to make decisions. There's no rule. So in the past, when UMNO was dominant, it's very clear-cut the prime minister and the next prime minister, a deputy minister would come from the same party. Can you say this for the next prime minister? No one knows, because there's no rule. So that brings to my third point. The absence of a hegemonic party like UMNO is not necessarily a plus for Pakatan Rakyat, Pakatan Harapan. Having an UMNO, of course, would lead to corruption and decadence. But not having UMNO, not having a system to allow for open competition, you do not do away the threat. As long as power is concentrated, parties would fight to fill that gap. And this is what happened with members from UMNO crossing over to Bersatu. Eventually, you might have two parties fighting to be the dominant party in PH. So what I'm saying is that permanent coalition, as convenient as it is, because this is the only game we have known for more than 6 decades, it's not a recipe for stability. It's not a recipe for healthy multi-party competitions. The solution requires us to move away in 2 aspects. First, we need to have more parties. So some of them could be non-communal. They could contest on issues like class or environment. We need to acknowledge the fact, as long as you have multi-party competition, we can't talk about unity. Party itself comes from the words part. It's about division. So if you do not want to have ethno-religious division, you must have non-ethno-religious division. And the first past the post system does not build towards that. Secondly, if you want the party to be more moderate, you want to increase the chance of them coming into power. So we need to learn how to overcome our fear of hung parliament. Because hung parliament means that you would have opportunities for post-election coalition. That gives incentive for party to move to the middle because they want to be in power. The second aspect we need to have is for ally to have competition. So voters need to be able to vote for the individual parties and not just for coalition. Eventually, I'm calling for a mixed member system where Malaysian voters are given 2 ballots, one to vote for the constituency, the candidate constituency representative as in the current system. This would continue to provide the incentive for vote pooling, which is good for coalition politics. But on the other hand, the second vote should allow voters to vote for the party directly. So you can have friendly matches. You can overcome infighting. You can overcome moral hazard. And how likely this is going to be? I would say it is more promising than before 2015. And that's not really because that we have a change in government. The real reason is this. First past the post is like a gamble. A PR system is like buying insurance. A gamble gives you the chance to win big, but also the risk to lose big. Buying insurance means to cut down what you have when your luck is good, but prevent your luck, but cut down also your loss when your luck is bad. Before 2015, or if you go back before 1998, when the Malays were politically united, it makes sense to keep first past the post. May not be good for the country, but it will be good for the Malays, and that would provide stability. Today, when in West Malaysia alone you have 5 parties competing for Malay support, it is dangerous for Malay to go on with this gamble. Moving away would be good for the Malays, would be good for the country, because it makes politics less risky. We need to eventually moving away from a British model towards something that's more German and perhaps more Indonesian. And how likely can this happen? We need Pakatan Harapan. There's too many coalitions changing names and so on. You need Pakatan Harapan to redefine their goal. What is the current goal? You talk to most PH politicians, the goal is to say, we must win the next term. Now, how to win the next term? One would tell you and say, that includes to give contracts to our division leaders so that we can defend our power. That's very much UMNO, the old UMNO. You want to move away from that. You basically need PH to define and say, we want a healthy system, we try our best to win, but in the event if we lose, we are not going to lose everything. We want to set in some irreversible changes. I'm hopeful, but certainly I do not think the way forward would be easy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong. If I could now ask each of our esteemed speakers one question before we open to the floor. So YB Khairi, if I could ask you about the structure of UMNO as a party. So from outside, it seems that a lot of the power is concentrated in the office of the UMNO party president as well as the division chiefs. And there seems to be less power at the state level and also at the grassroots level. So my question is, do you think that UMNO as a party needs structural reform? And if it does, you know, should you be UMNO party president, what changes would you introduce?
I ran for the presidency of UMNO last year. I lost. but I came in second. It wasn't a big loss. It was a decent loss. And during the campaign, the reason I'm saying this is because during the campaign, we were asked what sort of changes we proposed for UMNO. And one of the changes that I proposed was precisely what Francis alluded to. I felt that there was an over-concentration of power in the president as well as the warlord system. The warlord system in UMNO are your district chiefs, your division chiefs, constituency chiefs. And that's how decisions were made, and more importantly then, that's how patronage was distributed. So it became a rather exclusive club. We couldn't, it was very difficult for us to field new candidates, young candidates who did not have the blessing of the warlords or who weren't warlords themselves. So I said, we have to change this. We have to give more autonomy to the states and to the divisions. I even floated a radical idea which would, in effect, strip the president of a lot of his traditional UMNO powers, which was to have a primary system, something that Chin Huat alluded to just now, where candidates are chosen at a divisional primary by members as well as people who register in that primary. And therefore, you have a better chance of winning because you get a better indication of who's popular on the ground rather than who's close to the president. But obviously that becomes very difficult for the president because the person who's chosen in the primary has no loyalty to the president, unless the president said, I came up with the system, so you should be thankful to me. So it's a difficult reform, but I was willing to commit to that because I think unless you do that, you don't get candidates who are acceptable on the ground, truly acceptable on the ground, and you perpetuate the system of feudal power within UMNO. So I would like to see that kind of system. It makes the president extremely vulnerable, but the president will therefore get support based on policy rather than patronage after that.
Thank you. And Dr. Wang, if I could ask you a little bit about coalition. So you've been sort of talking about two coalitions, a dominant one and then one in opposition. Could it be that going forward, we're actually going to have a three-coalition system? So, of course, Pakatan Harapan, a shrunken BN/UMNO, and then PAS. And some people talk about the fact that they could form an alliance, but at the same time, we also know that they also compete for the same voter base. So perhaps the possibilities of them allying are relatively less, at least certainly in the first stages. So I guess where I'm going is, could it be that each of these parties play, or coalitions, a two-level game, which actually makes them more moderate? So yes, they need to campaign in the first round, of course, to get seats, but also they need to be cognizant that they need to make deals in the event that there is a hung parliament, and that the fact that they need to potentially do this will itself exercise a moderating influence on them.
Thank you for that question. One traditional thought about first past the post that it would encourage moderation by creating the need to pull votes together. But that argument actually has its limitation on the assumption. It works only if you're contesting in mixed constituency. So it doesn't work for parties that actually, let's say, if you are PAS, you're competing in contesting in Kelantan, Terengganu, it doesn't give you benefit by being moderate towards the mixed constituency in West Coast. So that limits the limitation, the appeal on the moderating incentive. What it might happen, a three-coalition format could have happened if Sabah UMNO did not collapse. Because Sabah UMNO and GBS in Sarawak could have come together as a Borneo front, and then they would press on the government. But with GPS alone now, it becomes very weak. But on West Malaysia, it's very unlikely for you to see UMNO and PAS remaining three-corner in the long run. Look at this election. Overall, the whole nation, you have 40% of MPs winning less votes than their opponents' votes adding together. They are minority winners. They have more opponents than supporters. The only reason they win is their opponents could not make up their mind. And most of these seats were actually between PAS and UMNO. So it makes sense for them to come together. If they were to come together and decide to contest on one slate, whether or not they call it a coalition, is a single bloc. So what we may see in West Malaysia, it can be a very problematic situation, a two-party system, not like in UK, but more like in Sri Lanka, where the ethnic majority is split into two. Only one side is friendly or accommodative towards the minority, and therefore the minority votes are locked in with only one side. And what it means is the kingmaker would be the median Malay. And if the median Malay is not progressive, the whole coalition would end up being pulled to the side. So I'm not at all optimistic that we would actually have moderation. If you want to encourage parties to be moderate, it's not about winning seats because of our ethnic composition. The only way is to induce them with prospect of coming into power, because that brings about administrative resources and perks and patronage. Politicians understand those things more than anything else.
Thank you very much. So we have about 20, 25 minutes for Q&A. So if I could ask those of us that are interested, please raise your hand. Yes, one over there, and two. Zainal as well, please.
Khairi, I'm really impressed by how cheerful you look after what you've been through. I'm very puzzled by your good cheer. So in trying to find out why you're so cheerful, let me ask you two questions. Clearly, your good cheer must be based, number one, on the fact you think that the Pakatan Harapan coalition is weak or fragile. And clearly, there, as you indicated, there are moves to sort of prevent Anwar Ibrahim from becoming the next prime minister. I think you alluded to that happening. So which are the forces that you think will act the strongest to prevent Anwar from taking prime minister? Is it Daim Zainuddin? Is it his deputy Azmin? Who's behind all this? And the second question to you is, looking at all the complex calculations of all these coalitions and all that, what kind of combination could one day bring back UMNO into power and make you the prime minister?
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, my question is related to Kishore's too. But I must say that, Khairi, by your comments, initial comments you made about UMNO and the problems UMNO faced soon after the election, I thought was rather impressive. You were very honest and you admitted the faults and the problems. And that says, I think, you have a future, I think. I don't know about the future UMNO, but yourself as a leader for Malaysia, the realities on the ground, I think you're actually bracing yourself for that. So my question is actually, are you bracing yourself for future Malaysia with Anwar as Prime Minister? And if not, do you think more UMNO jump MPs will help to delay that process and will help, in fact, Tun Mahathir to gain Mahathir's party, Bersatu, to gain more MPs on his party's slate, and that way will be able to delay or avoid Anwar becoming the Prime Minister. My second question, Chairman, with your indulgence, to Mr. Wong. I'm really impressed with your thinking about race and religion politics in Malaysia, but are you really ahead of your time in thinking about the issues and about the possibilities? Is Malaysia ready for that kind of race and religion politics, and what holds as far as race and religion politics for Malaysia? Thank you.
Thank you. If I can invite YB Khairi first.
Thank you. Thanks, Kishore, for the piercing questions. My cheerful disposition has absolutely nothing to do with Malaysian politics. It's because, simply because Manchester United is winning again. That's all there is to it, really. I have, I mean, on a personal level, but just to answer your question less facetiously, on a personal level, obviously, political loss of that magnitude and scale is psychologically very difficult to accept or even deal with. So you have to go through the various stages of grief. I don't know where I am right now, but I've discovered that PTSD is not restricted to military veterans, also political losers as well. Coming to your question about Anwar becoming Prime Minister, look, I only raise this, and I hate to speculate because I don't feel it offers much in terms of deep, profound structural discussion. But the only problem is in KL, as I said earlier in my talk, that seems to be the only thing that the political chattering class seem to ask me about. Do you think Anwar will become Prime Minister? And I tried to answer this in my talk earlier to say that it has huge implications on succession planning and on stability for Malaysia, simply because Dr. Mahathir is at the age at which he is at. Who are the powers, or what are the identity of the people who do not want to see Anwar become Prime Minister? And you mentioned some names. I mean, I think you could be right. I think, you know, there is a lot of chatter to say that there are some people around Dr. Mahathir who still remain uncomfortable with Anwar. But, and this also addresses Zainal's question, do I think, as an opposition member and as a Malaysian, that Anwar should be Prime Minister? Yes, I think he should be Prime Minister. For a few reasons. One, if he doesn't become Prime Minister, we will not hear the end of it. He cannot move on, and we cannot move on. Prince Charles and Anwar are the longest, you know. So he has to be Prime Minister for that reason. But there's a more serious point why he must be Prime Minister. I say this out of sincerity. I don't know the man. I've spoken to him twice in my life. He has to be Prime Minister because I believe that he is, one, the only person in Pakatan Harapan who can hold that coalition together, notwithstanding some very, very strong forces against him. Azmin's not senior enough to do that. Secondly, and more importantly, Anwar has a lot of shortcomings. When you hear him speak, it's like you're hearing somebody who's not had a job for 20 years. He's outdated, he's quoting Shakespeare, same passages from the Quran again and again. But one advantage that Anwar has that nobody else has is he has the ability to address this issue of identity politics. He speaks the language of modernity, and he speaks the language of tradition, especially when it comes to Islam and also the Malay identity. And for as long as identity politics remains an important marker in Malaysian politics, of which it will over the next couple of years, I think Anwar, possibly in Pakatan Harapan, is the only person who can manage to navigate around identity politics and prevent it from becoming something that is uglier than it potentially could be. Your second question, what configuration would it take for UMNO to come back into power? I'm going to ignore that second part of your suggestion just now. Well, I heard intently what Chin Huat had to say. He said it's better that we work together with PAS. We're not quite sure yet. Internally, we're doing our numbers to see instrumentally if working together with PAS yields success. In a sense, instrumentally meaning that the results will be in favor of Barisan Nasional. But intrinsically, I'm fundamentally against it. Simply because I don't think you should just look at instrumental outcomes in politics. There needs to be an acknowledgement that we have completely different worldviews. And if UMNO continues to stay with PAS, then, you know, why have UMNO in the first place? Just become PAS. And I think we're different than PAS. So my view, how will UMNO come back into power, is to try and get back that middle ground that we lost in the heartland, I believe if we can get that middle ground back, and still we're running the numbers, we can go from the 50-odd seats that we won on the 9th of May. Of course, that's reduced because of jumpers. But we can go from 50 back to around about 80, 85, 88 that we had in 2013. And then your post-election coalition politics that Chin Huat mentioned earlier comes into play. Sabah, Sarawak. Don't underestimate the tendency to want to work with the dominant Malay party on the peninsula. And if UMNO is that dominant party in the peninsula post-GE15, then surprise, surprise, you may have new coalition partners that you didn't even dream of. And briefly about Zainal's point about more UMNO people going to jump, I think with the transition, Zahid going on garden leave, that stopped. I've met with the MPs and I've asked them to come back. There's no threat of another wave of jumpers. But there is a concern because of the Malay disquiet, identity politics. I don't think Dr. Mahathir is looking to recruit UMNO MPs simply because of the reason that he wants to prevent Anwar from becoming Prime Minister. I think there's a deeper reason to it, and that is to strengthen the so-called conservative Malay core in Pakatan Harapan, to address this Malay discontent that you are seeing that came about from ISET and things like that. The Malays, if anything, they understand political power. They understand political numbers. We are strong, kuat semula, kembali kuat, that kind of thing. So it speaks to more than just a nefarious plan to deny Anwar of the premiership. It's more to shore up that Malay base in Pakatan Harapan.
Thank you. Dr. Wong?
Thank you. Am I ahead of my time? The answer could be yes or no. If my country is lucky, then I am ahead of my time because I worry too much. But my country was not lucky for 3 times. We missed the bandwagon in 1990 when a big part of the world got democratized. Our complexities has held us back. You can, in the worst scenario, things could have happened very quickly. You could have UMNO collapsing in the worst scenario. And while Pakatan may be hoping, together with this, that would grab the UMNO supporters. But if the identity politics, the anxiety, the disquiet run deep, Pakatan would only get UMNO leaders, but not their grassroots. The automatic default option for them would be PAS. And once you have everyone coming into Pakatan Harapan, before PAS really get very strong, the spoils are all inside, not outside. So you're going to have a large-scale civil war, unless you could sort out who to get what. And the outcome of that is that you probably have a part of Pakatan being pushed out. You have the new Pakatan with a substantial number of ex-BN, ex-UMNO, and that would disillusion your voters. With enough disillusionment, it would go for anyone. So the situation can be quite bad. We may not be able to get healthy, competitive politics we want, but rather the worst point. So, but if my country is lucky enough, somehow all the disaster did not happen, yes, I would probably be ahead of time, because the only thing that does not happen is fully competitive politics. Things get slower because they cannot gain the political momentum to move forward, but it probably wouldn't be disaster. So it really depends on how lucky Malaysia is, I would argue. Going back to, I want to touch on a bit of what YB Khairi talked about. I think it's very bold to think that we first past the polls with 3 corner fights, UMNO can actually not be the worst, would not lose out in a 3 corner fight. Because you need to be able to position yourself to sideline PAS, for example. It's not impossible, but it's going to be very challenging. Things will be much easier if you have more elections. If you're going to have more elections from local council to village and so on, then you open up, you normalize inter-Malay competition, and where there are enough resources, UMNO would be able to retain its talent. Given the current system now, I think it's very bold. But the outcome is not necessarily good for UMNO. I need to clarify what I say just now. To join force with PAS would be good for individual UMNO politicians because they stand better chance to win. But the outcome for UMNO could be like Semangat 46. UMNO is a party of incumbency, not of ideology. PAS is one of ideology. You team up together, the ideological party would eat up the incumbency party, especially when incumbency is lost. That's what happened to Semangat 46. And I have called on not to destroy UMNO in a month or two after elections. I say because if you destroy UMNO by depriving them constituency development fund, what happens is you end up having an opposition that do not need money to survive, and that's PAS. And it's much worse to have a party that survive on radical ideology than on patronage.
We have time for a few more questions. Do we have hands from this side of the room?
It's back.
Yes, please. Oh.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Hok An. I'm from ICS. Thank you very much for your presentations. And first to Kyrie, you soon after the elections, you publicly articulated your view about Najib and 1MDB and holding that responsible, largely, significantly responsible for BN and UMNO's defeat. You talk about entering uncharted territory, and I think one thing that's coming up will be when Najib goes to trial, Zahid will go to trial, then Adnan, and so on also. And I think many will view this as a test of whether UMNO is moving forward or will keep clinging to these sort of vestiges of the past. And there will be those who will claim selective prosecution, this is vindictive action, and will play up the issue again of non-Malay attorney general. So how is UMNO going to respond when these trials begin to take place? Is it going to be split? And how will in what directions? And personally, what stance would you take in terms of letting the justice system take its independent course, or how will you respond to those pressures to come to the defense of the old guard of UMNO? To Chin Huat, I appreciate your thoughts, and it's an analysis. It's very methodical. One thing about the coalition model, though, is that, and here coalition meaning formation before going into electoral contest, is that in the Malaysian case, it seems to be a track record that it compels the different parties towards taking that middle ground, towards being a more inclusive platform. Whereas a post-election coalition formation opens up the possibility and the risk of kingmaker parties, and then that could be extremist, and therefore the nation, the majority that forms, becomes captive to that extremist kingmaker. So just your reflections on that kind of risk. Thank you.
And one more question.
Sorry.
Yes, please, Wolfgang.
Wolfgang Sachsenröder. In the last 2 years, I have done some research on party funding and campaign costs. And party funding, campaign funding is, of course, #1 problem of all parties in the world, except maybe for many years for UMNO, considered to be the second richest party in Asia after the KMT in Taiwan. How do you imagine the future without this flows of funding? Thank you.
And I'm going to sneak in one last question to YB Khairi. What would you say to the proposal of opening UMNO membership to people of other ethnicities if I could invite... Oh, sure.
May I ask a question for YB as well? Well, you talk about reform. I think it's important to talk not just about reforming your party, but reforming the political system. What's your view of local elections? And specifically, I want to start with village election for the very simple reason. If you start talking about local elections in KL and so on, then it would be easily framed as whether we end up in the situations where the non-Malays would prevail, especially with a first-past-the-post system. But if you're going to start with village elections, or you start with council elections in KB or KT and so on, it would be all Malays. Are you for that? Are you more for more multi-party competition? I want to pose this question because it's often taken as granted. The answer is yes. From a communal point of view, multi-party politics is bad for your own community because you get split. So you prefer for the other ethnic groups to offer the competition while you remain united. So I want your view on those.
So I'm sorry, I have to cede to you again.
Oh, since I have more questions, can you go first? I have more time to think.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
Thanks.
Well, I have only one question. Thanks, Outman. You asked a very good question. When we talk about a choice over electoral system and party system, we are not talking about picking any perfect system. We are choosing between different sets of imperfections. So the problem with first past the post is that in theory, you're supposed to have a moderate coalition. More often than not, you have it somewhere in government. The price we pay is the opposition is deprived of hope and therefore get desperate and radicalized. They only come back to the middle when the government is split, but in the process, we move far away. If you're going to have a post-election coalition, you would need to, for it to work, you would need sort of a cartel of mainstream parties. Parties that would actually set some rules. In the case of Germany, the mainstream party would decide and say, only us will form the government. We'll work together to keep some parties out. Even in UK, you have the three main parties lock themselves together. You need that cross-party consensus. And I think if PH can look at it more profoundly with a longer horizon, they're willing to work with UMNO or PH to talk about a cartel of mainstream moderate parties, that it will work. Without that, of course, we are talking about what kind of risk that we go for. But having tried first past the post for 6 decades, I think it is good to start off. And this can start off with lower level elections. If you're going to introduce more elections, then you create more chances for party to be more moderate because they do not want to rule out their future government partners. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks. 4 questions. First question from the back of the room about how will UMNO respond to the upcoming trials, courtroom trials, especially of our former leaders. I think UMNO has taken a party view that justice has to, due course of the judicial process has to be exhausted. And we leave it to the courts to decide. Datuk Sri Najib and all the other ministers, ex-ministers who have been charged, have access to the best counsel that they can afford. And UMNO cannot be associated directly with those trials. What happens on a political level, though? I think that's more relevant for your question. Well, I think there were attempts to bring back Datuk Sri Najib as an advisor or de facto head and leader of UMNO recently. And I think the consensus view, before the consensus view, his own statement was that it is not appropriate for him to do so. And the consensus view within UMNO was that we should move on and not revisit past leadership. I have to be candid here that there is still quite strong support and sympathy for Datuk Sri Najib within the party. And I think it's important, although we want to draw a line between the past leadership and the future of UMNO, it is important to make sure that we are aware of that reservoir of support that he still enjoys within the party. So those of us like myself who want to reform, who've come forward to say that we got this wrong and he has to, he has to face the charges that have been laid in front of him, must be aware that we can reform and we must move forward from the era of Najib, but to do it in a way that doesn't fracture or fragment the party. And I think that's the challenge for the new leadership of the party. And I've told the new leadership of the party, I'm done criticizing the leadership. I'm happy with this new transition, and I'm back in the team to rebuild UMNO. But I have to be, aware myself that Najib still has a lot of support within the party. But his criminal charges are his problem to face and not for the party. So you raise an important point about party funding and campaign costs. I did not know that we were the second richest party in Asia. Had I known, I would have made sure I won the presidency of UMNO. But jokes aside, I suspect that we are no longer the second richest party in Asia. Much of those monies have been seized, either from Najib's condominium or other places. And they're likely to be frozen for some time. But it allows us to reinvent UMNO. This was a party of patronage, a party of concessions and a rentier culture. We have to imagine a new future where it's not without funds, but it's funds that are sourced in a proper way, which is why I'd like to have institutional reforms that BN, Barisan Nasional, championed even before the elections. We need legislation for party funding to make sure that we know who gives money to whom. We know that if you want to give money to a particular party, you have to register, and that registrar is available to the public. It's open data. And that allows people to contribute, ironically, without fear or favor. People are afraid of contributing to opposition parties because they're afraid they'll be penalized somehow. But if they are transparent about it, and they are seen to be treated unfairly, if they're a business, for instance, then people can say this is unfair. This is because they've contributed to the opposition party. So I think more sunshine on party funding is better. We need to also have a realistic limit on campaign spending. The statutory limit for campaign spending is not adhered to by anybody. Probably some independent candidates adhere to it because they don't have the money, but certainly not the main candidates. I mean, if you look at Anwar's campaign recently in Port Dickson, he certainly spent more than 200,000, whatever it is that you're allowed to spend. So let's be real about this, and let's come up with a proper enforcement, and hopefully the new chairman of the Election Commission will come up with a new realistic formula and enforce that formula. And I hope that Chin Huat and others will also closely monitor the new government, because obviously governments like to use incumbency, government machinery, agencies to campaign during by-elections and elections. We did it, quite openly. But I hope that in the spirit of New Malaysia, we can also make sure that the abuse of government machinery and abuse of government assets are eliminated going forward. Francis asked about opening UMNO membership to non-Malays. I suggested this during the UMNO elections. It was a difficult thing for the UMNO members and the UMNO cadres to swallow. Whilst I believe in the long run, UMNO should evolve into a multi-racial party, what we need to do today is to figure out what happens to Barisan Nasional. Chin Huat mentioned earlier that effectively Barisan Nasional is dead. Barisan Nasional, as we knew it, as a 13-party coalition practicing consociational politics, is dead. I mean, we're left with the original 3 alliance members. What do we do with Barisan Nasional? We can't go it alone. There has to be some form of multi-racial, multi-ethnic platform that UMNO can lead or that can be part of. So I think pushing UMNO to become a multiracial party, I will lose the ground. And and therefore render me, as what Chin Huat said earlier, this quixotic, useless, idealistic fool who wants to try to reform too much and chew off more than he can bite. So I think strengthen BN, maybe direct membership into BN, maybe have many more parties within Barisan Nasional. I like this idea of a multitude of party, Chin Huat. It's forced me to rethink again my position about how to rebuild Barisan Nasional as a coalition. And that speaks to my last point, your last question rather. Do I support local elections? Yes. In a word, yes, I support local elections. Why Chin Huat cushion that question with a few caveats is very simple. The moment one thinks of local elections in Malaysia, it becomes an ethnic issue. It becomes an ethnic issue because there's an assumption that if you have city council elections, the council will be dominated by one particular ethnic group. I like the fact that we can start it at a village level, and I like that maybe perhaps we use the third vote or the local elections as an avenue to reform first past the post. If we can design, and not even at the village level where it's a Malay majority, if we can design at the city councils an electoral system that will allow for a decent, diverse representation, regardless of what a first past the post system may throw up, then I think it's easier to sell. And I think that that is something that I would like to work with on a bipartisan level. I think, this is a time for democracy and deepening democracy, but make sure that you're not outflanked by identity politics, which it so easily can. Thank you.
So we have unfortunately come to the end of our time. We've had insightful presentations. We have had hard questions. We've had interesting cross-fertilization between the two presenters. We've discussed UMNO's structure, its leadership, possibilities for reform, including opening membership to people of other communities. We've discussed potential prime ministers. We've discussed Anwar's political future. We've discussed coalition and consociational politics. We've discussed campaign financing. We've discussed local elections, and we've even discussed Manchester United and Spider-Man. So with that, please do join me in thanking our two presenters.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson and distinguished panelists for a very rich and insightful session. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our forum. We hope you had a wonderful and enriching time with us. Highlights from today's forum, including photos and videos, will be uploaded to ICS Yusof Ishak Institute's website in due course. Please take a few minutes to complete the mailing list and feedback forms, and do bring your completed feedback forms to the registration booth for a complimentary copy of ICS publication. Once again, we would like to thank our main sponsors, Albizia Capital, Keppel Group, and Professor Saw Swee Hock for their generous support towards the Regional Outlook Forum 2019. And finally, thank you all for participating in today's forum, and we look forward to seeing you again at next year's Regional Outlook Forum on 9 January 2020. Do save the date for us. Thank you, and we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.